Okay, hi there. We're going to go ahead and get started with factoring this trinomial right here, n squared minus 11n plus 10. The reason it's called a trinomial is because there are three different terms. There's an n squared term, there's just a n term, and then there's a term with no variable. So this is a quadratic equation because it's squared. It's to the second power. That means this quadratic. And quadratic equations come in standard form. So when we're doing this, I'm going to point out a couple things that are just important to note. You can watch other videos on this, but I want to call out a couple things that are really important. So the first thing is this standard form that I just highlighted right here. What you want to note is that they follow a standard form because A, B, and C are the coefficients. So in this case, the trinomial that we have in front of us, the A term in front of that n squared is just an invisible 1. It's not really there, but we know there's only one n squared. And then the B term in this case is going to be the negative 11. So one thing that's really important to do when you're factoring is to, when you look at the coefficients, like what's your B coefficient, in this case it's negative 11, use the sign with it. Like keep the sign right here, the negative, connected to it, because that's going to help when you're factoring to figure out which numbers to use. So negative 11 is B, and then our C, the term without a variable, just C by itself, is positive 10. Remember to keep the positive 10. Okay, so here is what is called the AC method, Some people do it a different way. That's the way that I found, based on how I learned it in high school. You make this X, you take A times C up here, and then you take B down here. So A times C, let's start with A times C. 1 times positive 10. Positive 1 times positive 10. Okay, pretty straightforward. That's just 10. Regular positive 10. And then the B, in this case, is a negative 11. So you just write negative 11 there. Okay, so this is the start of the AC method. So far, so good. We multiplied A times C, and we copied over our B. Now what we need to do is find factors of the number written in the top, which in this case is 10, positive 10, that are going to multiply to make positive 10, and they're going to add to make negative 11. Okay, so we know we're going to be dealing with some negatives here. So when we write out the factors of 10, to get positive 10, we could do 10 times 1. We could do 5 times 2. But then we could also do a negative times a negative and get a positive, right? If it's negative 10 times negative 1, that will also equal positive 10. So that would work also as long as we keep the negative situation, negative 5 times negative 2 also equals positive 10. So now we have to figure out which of these add up to negative 11. Okay, so positive 10, positive 1 equals positive 11. That's not going to work. Positive 5, positive 2 adds to positive 7. That's not going to work. Negative 10 and negative 1 adds to negative 11. So there we go. We got our negative 10 and our negative 1. So you can write them up there. So now you know what you're going to rewrite your B as. Okay, we're taking these terms right here, and we're going to rewrite B as these terms, because we know when we combine them, it will just make B. It will make the negative 11. So I'm going to rewrite the whole equation right now. N squared, I'll put the 1 just to remind us. And I'm going to use this negative 1 first, and you'll see why in a minute. But I want this negative 1 to be by my positive 1n. I'm going to rewrite it as negative 1n, and then the minus 10n plus 10. So I hope you're with me so far. All we did was take the take the negative 11, and then we took two terms and broke apart the negative 11 into a negative 10 and a negative 1, because we know that when we combine these two terms later, they'll just become a negative 11. But we're kind of going in reverse order here, okay? We don't want to combine them because we're factoring. It's the opposite of that. Okay, so I'm looking at these two terms. Did that part. Now is the next part that gets confusing. You're going to group. You're going to group your terms. And here is the reason why I wanted the negative 1 over here. Because when I group this group over here, and I group this group right here, and you're making so careful to make sure you grouped that negative sign. You need the negative with the 10. You can't just leave the minus outside. You're grouping them up. It's okay to group them up, to add some parentheses here. It all means the same thing. So the reason I wanted it to be this way instead of writing, I could have written the negative 10n here and the negative 1n here, and it would have been okay, but this is just going to make it easier. These two have a common factor that's really straightforward. What do these two numbers have in common that I can divide, that I can pull out? Well, it's a 1n. They have a 1n in common. So I'm going to pull out a 1n down here. I'm going to take my 1n outside. Then I'm going to say, what do I need to multiply by 1n to get 1n squared? Just another n. 1n times n is 1n squared. And then what do I need to multiply 1n to get negative 1n? Just a negative 1. 1n times negative 1 is negative 1n right there. Boom. So this part is done. Let's go to the other side. What do these two terms have in common? Now this could be a little bit tricky, but what you want to do is make these parentheses match this group. So if I do it right, it'll match this group. So instead of pulling out a positive 10, I'm going to pull out a negative 10. That's a factor that they have in common. And now I ask myself, what would I need to multiply by this negative 10 to get negative 10n? Well, that's easy, just an n. So far, so good, right? Because we're pretty close to matching our parentheses. So if I did it right, the answer on the other side should be a negative 1. Does that make sense? If I take a negative 10 right here and I multiply it by a negative 1, will I get a positive 10? Yes. Check. Check. It worked. So now take a look at what you've done. Look at the work that we've just done here. We have two groupings of parentheses that match. Check. That works. And then I've pulled out the factors. Right here, I've pulled out by dividing the common factors that they had in those groups. So the final step is to rewrite the full factored form here. You can take that group in parentheses, n minus 1, it matches. So that if that's a common factor, you just write that out. And then you have to include those other factors. This is n minus 10, because remember the 1n is the same thing as n minus 10. And this is the fully factored form. Now, I just want to point out, to check your work and make sure you did this all right, you would just take these two binomials and you would do FOIL. So I'm going to go ahead and do FOIL right now. And if I do the FOIL right, I should get this original answer right here. So let me just make some space off to the side. And this is what I'm looking for when I FOIL. And this is what I'm going to FOIL. So I'm doing n minus 1 multiplied by n minus 10. I'm going to start with my FOIL firsts. N times n is n squared. Now I'm going to do my outsides. N times negative 10 is negative 10n. Now I'm going to do my insides. Negative 1 times n is negative 1n. And lastly, I'm going to do my last terms. So that's going to multiply n times negative 10. N times negative 10 is negative 10. Whoops. My bad. Last terms are this negative 1 and this negative 10. That was my bad. Negative 1 times negative 10 is positive 10. And I look for terms that I can combine. I can't combine anything with the n squared. I can combine these two. So I can move the n squared down. I can combine a negative 10 and a negative 1 and make negative 11n. And this nothing can combine with, so it's plus 10. Now, does this match the original equation? Yes, it does. It's exactly the same. So we checked our work after we FOILed, after we factored, and it worked. So job well done. Those are what you need to remember when you're factoring.